Hey guys, we just want to make sure that everyone could hear us on our end. So we'll go ahead and we can see that we do now have audio. So we'll be starting the presentation once more. We'll be starting at the top. Just as a brief introduction, this is Aaron Hill. I'm a customer success manager over here at Xamarin. We also have Michael Watson, who will be conducting the presentation today. I'll let Mike introduce himself.
All right, sorry about all that, guys. So my name is Michael Watson. I'm a customer success engineer here at Xamarin. I'm a certified mobile developer through Xamarin University, and I have some really cool stuff that I'm very excited to show everybody about today. And really, it's going to be about Xamarin best practices and how to really start accelerating your application development in Xamarin Studio. So just to give a little agenda of what we're going to be going over, we're going to be going over components and nuggets. So these are two ways you can actually really quickly accelerate your app development and add a lot of cool functionality with just a few clicks of a button. Architecture is going to be a very big focus point. That's one of the best ways to maximize your code sharing is to create a proper architecture. And it's also very important to make your code clean enough to where others would be able to look at your project and understand what you're trying to do. That's best practices just in coding in general. And then we're also going to go into portable class libraries, or as Miguel likes to call pickles. Definitely one of my favorites, but we'll also be covering shared libraries and kind of portable class libraries versus shared libraries. And then we're going to go into some real-world practical demos where there's been a lot of questions about Xamarin Forms, so I decided to put a little bit of that into the demo. But we're going to show how to share lists and how to share views. And then in our second exercise, we're going to go into actually how to create themed elements and how to make a custom renderer for those themed elements. And this is a really big way to cut down on how much code is in your shared projects and really start maximize your code sharing across your platforms. So let's go ahead and get into it. So in the components and nuggets, like I was saying, these are really easy ways to accelerate your development. So I'm going to exit out and show everybody the component store. So here's the Xamarin component store. You can also access this directly through Xamarin Studio, but it's a quick way to see libraries and shared projects. So first we'll talk about portable class libraries. So some of the pros of portable class libraries is the biggest thing is the centralized code sharing. You know, you can, especially with Xamarin Forms and other techniques in Xamarin, you can have almost all your code in your portable class library. That's where you can start having your 80%, 75-80% shared code, and then just having your user interface platform specific. And it can really easily be referenced by other projects. And I'll show you how we end up doing that in our exercise, but you're basically just creating a small little instance and a very, very easy reference and be able to use it across your entire project. The downside is platform-specific libraries cannot be referenced. And what that really is meaning is when you use a portable class library, the more you're targeting with it, it needs to have common ground between all the platforms. So libraries that are only specific to Windows Phone can't be used in a portable class library because they're not a common library between all the platforms. So that's really one of the limitations of PCLs. But you know, the thing I like about PCLs is you really are trying to separate out what the platform-specific libraries are into the platform-specific areas. So that's where I keep all my native code in my platform-specific libraries and in my platform-specific projects. But we also have shared projects. So shared projects, the big difference and the benefit is you can actually have platform-specific references. So you can have other libraries in there and use certain conditional compilation that could be branched off of different platform bases. Now the cons, you know, files used in referencing the project are compiled into that DLL, and it actually ends up pushing your what's part of your shared project into each of your platform areas. So think of it almost as like a duplication in each one of the projects for iOS, Android, when you actually compile it and break down the project. There's always a lot of questions on, should I use a portable class library versus a shared project? And I've heard every answer in between. I think the more important thing is what you feel comfortable with in your capabilities. For example, I use portable class libraries for pretty much everything, and I never use shared projects. And there's no reason for that. It's just that I'm more comfortable in portable class libraries, and I can do everything that I need to in that. I feel very comfortable reaching into the native user interface and keeping everything separated in the native project. So if you ever kind of question yourself, I would just try opening up both and kind of playing around with both until you see what style you like and what works best for you. So with that said, we're actually going to go ahead and jump into our first exercise. So if you guys had a chance, we had all of the materials sent out ahead of time. If you had a chance to download those. If you didn't, let me see if we can get a link posted into the chat window with those download materials. So we'll just go ahead and open up. In the first exercise, I have a start and complete. So if you don't get a chance to follow along, you'll have the complete project to look at all the code. So we're just going to go ahead and open up the start of exercise 1. And so you'll notice in here I have a nice architecture kind of built out. You'll see I have a folder that says views. I have a data layer folder. I have my models folder. And so I'm separating things out to make things a little bit easier to see. So let's look at the data layer first. So you'll see I have what I call a hot database. And this is basically my data layer. And you'll see there's just a ton of list items. This would normally be something you'd probably have in a server. For our example, I figured it was probably easy enough just to put it out like this. And this right here, this get hots, that's what would be considered our data access layer. So you'll see I combined them for this simple example. But we have this actual return of hops. So it's actually just getting all the hops that are in the list. So that's the only access layer that I have in here, is returning the list of hops. And you'll see I made model hops, and I have a name and then what's called an alpha acid percentage. But that's just what we're going to use. So now, what we normally have when we open up a new project with Xamarin Forms is we have this content page with hello world. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to first create a content page with a list view. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new file. So actually I'm going to create it under views because this is going to be a content page. So we're going to create a new file. And just for you guys, personally, my preference is starting with empty class files and creating the structure out myself. It kind of just depends, like I said, on what your preference is. So for here, I'm going to be so just to say, I can actually create a content page, but for here, I'm going to create a general empty class. And I'm just going to call this main page. Awesome. So now, before we go any further, I'm going to want to make sure I have my Xamarin Forms that we're using. And we're also going to be using the system collections generic. And that's going to be for our list feature. Now, the first thing we want to do is when we're creating this view, this is going to be a content page. So we're going to want to call it a content page. And that's just going to let Xamarin Studio know, hey, this is a content page. Now, I talked about the data layer. How do we get that? So the first thing we want to do is we want to create an instance of the hop database. All right, so here we create this instance of the hop database. So now we can actually use that method to get our hops. So let's create our list. Okay, so we got our hops available, and we're going to say that's part of our hop database, and we're going to just want to return get hops. All right, so now we have the list of hops from our data layer. So now we want to create the list view. So we're going to go ahead and create a list view. We'll call it hops list view. All right. And now I always like to start out, and there's a few different ways that things can be done when you're using Xamarin Forms. You can create your list view this way and actually put all of your conditions in here. So like my horizontal options, I can go ahead and put these in and separate them by commas. And then there's also the option of doing this. And you can, whoops. It's all personal preference, you know, whatever is easiest for you. For our example, I'm going to go ahead and continue with using this style. So we're just going to go ahead and put in some basic information about our list view. So we want to have all our horizontal and vertical options expand the entire page. Our item source is going to be our hops available. So since we just determined that, and now we need to create the item template. And the item template, what that's going to do is we're going to use a lambda, and we are actually going to return a view cell in this. So when we create this view cell, we're going to have a few items. So for our example, we're going to use two different labels, and we're going to stack them in our view cell. So first we need to create two labels. So we're going to have the hop name. Okay. And then we're going to actually set a binding. Okay. And when we set a binding, we're going to want to look at the text property of the label. And then we're going to do a new binding. And we're going to want, this is where we want to use from our model, what is the property. So with the label, the hop name, we're going to want to grab the name of the hops from our list view. And then we're only going to be binding that one way. So binding mode one way. We're not going to need to convert it. And then we're just going to want to display things just as it would show. And that's our binding. So now we just need to set our horizontal options. So we're going to want this to start at the very first beginning. So it's going to be to the far left of each cell. And then for the vertical options, we're going to want to actually center and expand that. So it's in the center of our cell. Okay? And now we got to do our next, our alpha acid percentage. And with there, we're going to do, you know, a similar binding. So it's still the text property that we want to target. And now, let's see, in our, if AA low is what the property is. Okay. And same idea, we're doing a one-way binding mode. We're not going to want to convert these. And here we're actually going to want to display this with a little percent sign afterwards. Pretty simple. All right, and now for this one, we want our options actually to be for the layout at the end and expand. So it takes up the rest of the cell. And then for the vertical options, we're going to still want to do center and expand. Whoops. Perfect. So now we just need to return the view cell. And that view is going to be a stacked layout. And this is how we're actually going to stack these two labels next to each other. So we're going to stack them horizontal, so they stack next to each other. And then we're going to want to center expand them in the cell. We'll add some padding around it, just to make it look a little prettier on the screen. So for iPhones, on the height, we're actually going to want to specify that there is basically 20 pixels for the navigation bar, or the little icons at the top, the power. If we don't do that, it'll actually be hidden behind that. So right there, I just created a thickness, and in our thickness method, you actually just have left, top, right, bottom. So 5 pixels on the left, 20 for iPhone on the top, 10 on the right, and 5 on the bottom. All right, and we don't want any spacing between these, and we'll define the children. Now, the one thing that's not quite there is when you actually create in the Lambda. So as we create these Lambda labels in this new to data template, they're not actually going to be read. So you'll notice when I type in the values, the IntelliSense isn't picking it up. So there's a way to fix that, and that's actually if you created your labels outside of the list view. So up here and actually created my label hop name equals new label, like that, I can actually then reference it and it would start popping up. So that being said, we have our children. Let's just close off this return and plug it into our code. Let's see. There we go. And that's there. Close that off. And I think we have we're missing one little guy somewhere. Here. Oh, this return. There we go. All right. So now if we build that, everything should build fine. So now that we have the list view created, remember this is a content page, so we need to say this content is equal to hop list view. And that is actually setting the list view into the content page. Now if we go back to our app.cs, let's go ahead and comment out this return new content page. We can actually say return new main page. And now let's go ahead and try running that in our iOS simulator. And we should get a list view that all pops up just from the database. All right, there we go. So you see we have our nice little list view. So very simple. Now, very commonly what I've ran into is I've made a list view on a content page only to go further in my project to find I need to show that same list view over and over again. So there's actually an easier way to start sharing your list view code. So let's go ahead and jump into that. So using this same idea, we're going to go ahead and create a new page, or a new view, and we're actually going to call this our hop list view. So in our hop list view, okay, we're going to want to use the same Xamarin Forms, the same generic collections. Now, in this list view, now we're going to be calling this a list view. So we're actually telling Xamarin, hey, this is going to be a list view. So now that we've defined this as a list view, ahead and still create our hop database reference. Database. Okay, so we have our hop database. We're going to create our list of the hops available. All right, and so now that we've created this as a list view, we can actually start using the this feature. So instead of creating a new list view, we can actually just say this dot horizontal options is equal to layout options dot fill and expand. And so now I can actually start doing basically what I did before, but I'm actually creating it in just a list view. So let's go ahead and get all this stuff kind of filled in. So the hops available. Now the cool thing is when I create this item template, I can actually go back into my main page and I can copy and paste all this code. Come back here and I can actually just go ahead and paste it in. Let's close this application output. So you'll see, let's make sure everything's lined up. You'll see I actually have everything in here pretty much the same as before. But now I actually have this list view with all the information I need in the list view. So let's go ahead and build that, make sure everything's good. Oh, whoopsies. I meant to take just the data template, not the whole list view. And now I've messed up my pages real quick. So after this, I need to close that out. All right, and now we should be fine. Okay, great. So now we have a list view. So now what I can do is I can just go back in here and I can say, all right, let's return a new content page. Right? And then we're going to say the content is going to be new list view. So now what I'm doing is I'm actually going to have the same list view that we created, but now it's in something to be shared and used over and over again. Oh, I see my problem. Oops. I said new list view, I meant hop list view. So now this hop list view is a list view that can be shared in multiple places in my application. So whenever I have any content page that I need to display this, I can actually take just the list view and push that into it. So it's a really easy way to start sharing one list that you create once and being able to use that code over and over in different places in your examples. So taking this a step further, in the next exercise we're going to go through, I want to show you guys what I like to think of as theme elements. So every project you're creating, you're actually going to be creating a brand in your project if you think about it. You're going to have some app and you want to have some theme. When you look at the really nice apps, you know, all the entries are the same background colors, the numbers by the text, it's all the same. Everything's the same in every place. Oops, did I open the completed one? Sorry about that, guys. So how do you go about starting to do that? So right here, I have, I create an application grid for everybody. So you can see right there. And I'll go ahead and run it just so you can see what this looks like. But just with a few lines of code, we're able to add a lot of stuff, but I mean, this looks pretty ugly. And for me to individually go in and start changing all of these elements, you know, when I click on here, it brings up the wrong keyboard. The text just looks kind of poor. There needs to be a theme to it. So what I like to call is what I use is custom elements. So one option is I can go into here, and when I'm making this label, I can actually say like, okay, well, I also want the text color to be blue, and that'll make the color blue, but I'm going to have to do that for every single label. So that's going to add another line of code for every label. Then if I want to make the entries have a numeric keyboard, another line of code for every entry. So creating a themed element actually is the best solution here. So we'll go ahead and add a new file to our custom elements. And I'm going to call this themed label. So just using Xamarin Forms, I have my themed label. And just as I did before, and kind of the reason I started off with you in the content page is to show you, we can actually just define this themed label as a label. Now just coming into here, I can do very simple things. So this.textColor is equal to color.blue. Oops. Just like I wanted before. And then let's say I wanted to do the font. And I want it to be on the platform call. So I'm going to use the marker felt thin for iOS. And for Android, I'm going to use the Droid Sans. And I'm just going to put in a Windows Phone, even though I don't have that project there, in case I ever want to add one in the future. All right. Great. So now I've created this themed label. So now just by taking my theme label, I can actually go into here and say, oh, there's a theme label that I want. So I can actually just replace all my labels here now. So that's 5 themed labels I just added. So I added, what was that, 5 lines of code. It's not letting me click. There we go. Okay, so I added some very, very simple code, and I'm able to actually get all the information in there. So you can see I still have my old label right here with product, and that's what it looks like compared to all my themed labels. So in the 6 labels I'm going to create in this project, I created 5 lines of code right here, but that would have been 30 lines of code if I would have added it to every label. So there's a quick, easy way to start doing that. So now let's go in and take this another step, and let's add a themed entry. So using Xamarin Forms, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is an entry. So now, using the same methodology as before, I'm going to say this. I want there to be a placeholder of 0 for all the entries that are going to be in this theme. I don't want the background color to be gray. Let's say gray. And then I also, which is really important for me and for the user experience, is I want all the keyboard to look like a numeric keyboard. That's all I want to pop up for the user. I don't want them to have to click the number button. That's just more things to punch in. So taking that themed entry, I can actually just go ahead, change my elements right there. Let's go ahead and hit play. Awesome. So now this is great. Now you'll see my numeric keyboard only pops up, and I've shared all the code across all of my items. So you'll notice in my grid, I actually added no lines of code, and I've been able to create a very generic theme to my application, and I can use this throughout my application. Now, Forms has some limits, and this is where I wanted to show you how you can this even a step further. So let's say I want all these numbers in my entries to be centered. Well, I'm going to show you how to create a custom renderer for the custom element that you just created. So let's go ahead and jump into that. So now we're going to go into our iOS project. And if we have enough time, I'll go ahead and do it in the Android project as well for everyone. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a new file. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do an empty class for myself. That's kind of the way I go. And I'm going to call this custom entry renderer. So now that I have this, there's going to be a little bit more that we're actually going to use to get this file set up. So we're still going to be using Xamarin Forms. We're also going to be wanting to use the Xamarin Forms platform that's iOS specific. We're going to be using our themed elements, and we're also going to be using themed elements iOS. And then we're, of course, going to be using the MonoTouch UI kit. Great. So now, the first thing we want to do is we want to create the assembly and export it. So this line that I'm now is I'm actually going to be creating, I'm going to be exporting a renderer. And now here are the important pieces to remember. Is when you're exporting this renderer, you need to think of what's your handler and what's your target. So we already created our themed entry. So that's actually going to be our handler. And now our target is going to be type of our custom renderer, custom entry renderer. The way I always think about it is I always just copy and paste this piece into my target, because this is the target renderer we're creating. And then, just as before, where we define things as an entry or list view table, we're going to define this too and say, hey, this is an entry renderer. Now, we're not going to need anything right here, but we're going to want to actually override the on element change. So we'll do a protected override. Now, one thing to notice is you'll notice I don't have my on element change popping up. Now, the reason for that is Xamarin Forms isn't updated. So you'll have to update Xamarin Forms in any project. So in the example you guys have, if you're following along, you'll also want to update that package. So the on element change will actually pop up. So once we have that, we can just do a quick check, make sure that the old element will be null. Now let's go ahead and we want to get the native field. So we'll call it, I'll just call it a text field. And so this is where you're actually going to be using the native element. So for this, it's a UI text field, right? And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want control over that. Now we can do whatever we want with it. So I can take the native text field and I want to align the text and I want it centered. And let's say I also wanted to do the color here. Let's say the tint color of the little blinking thing, the cursor. Let's say I want to make that white also. Okay? So now let's go ahead and build that, make sure everything builds right. We should be good. Xamarin Studio has been running a little slow for me this morning. All right, there we go. No errors. So let's go ahead and try and run this and see what it looks like. Ooh, type load exception has occurred. Let me clean this. try this one more time. I have messed up somewhere for you guys. Themed entry. All right, sorry about that, guys. Hit a little bit of a snag. And it's something that I just did with my custom renderer. So let me just look this over real quick. My themed entry. Well, here, let me just, for this class, let me go ahead and just open up so you guys can see right here. So you'll see I have right here in my custom entry render, the same thing, just change the text alignment and the color. And I have my custom elements all built in. And let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. Great. So now you can see we have our cursor. It's white, it's blinking, and all of our values are staying in the middle. So we've center aligned them. So now we've created a very basic themed elements in our application, and we've also created a custom renderer for that themed application. And I actually have it in Android too. So we'll go ahead and start that up. I have my player open, so hopefully it plays nicely. The new Xamarin Android player, I'm definitely loving it. Just to give you guys also a little show of what the custom renderer looks like on Android. So you'll see we're actually just using the Xamarin Forms Android platform. We're using our themed elements Android, and using the same basic idea of the structure, just like in the iPhone renderer. Beautiful. So now you can see we have everything here. We have everything lined up in the center, and it still shows up just our numbers, or our number keyboard. So very quick and easily, we're able to create a cross-platform project that has different elements and a generic theme, and all of the code can be shared. So there's a lot of power here. And this custom renderer I showed you is just for an entry, but you can go into as detailed as lists, pages. I mean, you can do a custom renderer for pretty much anything. So this is one of what I found is one of the most powerful ways to really start sharing your code across the platform and making things look nice right off the bat. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump. So that kind of concludes our webinar. That's the Xamarin best practices. Right here I have some resources. If you wanted to learn a little bit more about pickles and portable class libraries and shared projects, I would definitely recommend you read up on both of them and kind of see what's the flavor that you like and what's best for you and kind of your code styles. There's always a best practice of keeping your code looking nice and pretty and structured, but a lot of coding is, what works best for you and what makes the most sense to you. And then I also put in a little bit about the architecture documentation that kind of goes into a little more explanation of the layers and how you can structure your application on a high level. So that being said, if anyone has any questions, my email is there at the top. Please feel free to send me an email, and I can go ahead and help answer that.
Yep, and as a reminder, we've had some really good questions come in throughout the course of the webinar. Do take advantage of Michael's email address. There were some really good ones about there about custom renderers. So please feel free to utilize this as a resource. Additionally, this recording will be sent out as a follow-up, so if you were following along and we were moving at a good pace, we were just being conscious of people's time. So this will be sent out. You'll be able to review this recording later on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. And have a great rest of the day.